And now, marine weather around Alaska. Hi, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your marine weather outlook. And taking a look at the sea ice edge here on this Tuesday, August 1st, we still have a fair amount of ice there just off of the central Arctic coast in and around there, Utqiagvik. And up across the Arctic Ocean, though, the ice is continuing to gradually melt off. Plenty of open water, Katovik eastward toward the Mackenzie River Delta, and then a broad area of open water across the Chukchi Sea. As far as the weather map on this Tuesday afternoon, we have high pressure located centered south of Kodiak Island and southeast of the Alaska Peninsula. The ridge extends northward across the interior southwest mainland, and then there is another low way up in the Arctic Ocean, well off the Arctic coastline. We have a couple of thermal lows from northwest Canada with troughs back into the North Slope and down along the Alaska Range toward the Susitna Valley. And then a low out in the western Aleutians with an occluded front. This system will gradually work its way eastward, but have a tendency to weaken as it bumps into a larger ridge of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So Wednesday afternoon, we still have a high situated south of the Gulf, southeast of Kodiak Island, with a ridge extending up across the mainland. This feature will continue to build through the end of the week into the weekend, which will allow for much warmer temperatures to develop over the mainland. But this will allow areas, marine layers, low cloudiness, some areas of fog to persist along sections of the Gulf Coast, as well as across much of the Bering Sea. We often see that with lower cloud cover and areas of fog. So Thursday, still high pressure centered just south of the Gulf, with a ridge extending northward and a couple of thermal troughs across the mainland. And then the initial occluded front working its way east, dissipating to just a trough, with another low further west toward the coast of Japan. So Wednesday, marine weather for the southeast panhandle. Winds will be northwesterly through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. 2-foot waves, variable winds around 5 knots, waves a foot or two within Stevens Passage. South winds 10 knots, Lynn Canal waves a foot or two as well. Variable winds 5 to 10 knots, especially off of the main coastline, waves running 2-3 feet. And then on Thursday, we expect northwest winds, Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance at around 10 knots with waves running a couple of feet. South winds to 15 knots in Lynn Canal with waves a foot or two. And then the outer coast, especially once you're northwest of Craig, Sitka, off of Yakutat Bay, variable winds at just 5 knots and waves running 2 to 3 feet. For the northwestern Gulf Coast, variable winds around 10 knots off of the Kenai and west of Cape Suckling, and within Prince William Sound, northern portions of Cook Inlet and at the entrance of Cook Inlet, just variable winds around 10 knots with waves not more than 1 to 3 feet. And on Thursday, we expect variable winds to continue here in the northwest corner of the Gulf and around Prince William Sound off the Kenai at 10 knots with waves, again, generally just a foot or two, though southwest winds 15 knots could kick up waves 3 to 4 feet throughout lower and up through much of the length there of Cook Inlet. Winds will be southwesterly in the vicinity of Kodiak Island around 15 knots with waves 3 to 4 feet. Lighter winds 15 to 20 knots south-southeast, waves 2 to 4 feet on the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Variable winds within Bristol Bay at 10 knots, waves around a foot, but winds will increase southeasterly to 30 knots with waves of 3 to 5 feet, especially there north of Cold Bay, associated with that weakening occluded front. On Thursday, still southwest winds around 15 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. But as we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, generally southeasterly winds as high as 20 to 25 knots south and southwest there of Sandpoint, False Pass, and north of Cold Bay, with waves is running a few feet on the Bering side and 3 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side. Winds across the Aleutians, eastern Aleutians, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, turning southwesterly, especially from Atka westward through Adak, Kiska, at 20 to 25 knots. Waves generally throughout the eastern and central Aleutians, 5 to 6 feet, North Pacific side, 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side. And then on Thursday, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, eastern Aleutians, variable winds 10 knots there near and west of Nikolsky. Winds become southerly 15 to 20 knots, veering southwesterly, Kiska westward towards Shimia, and waves generally 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side, and anywhere from 2 to as high as 5 and 7 feet once you get from Atka westward along the western Aleutians. And then along the southwest coast, we can see southeasterly winds as high as 25-30 knots, vicinity of St. Paul, St. Matthew, waves up near 10 feet. But variable winds 10 knots, waves only a foot within Bristol Bay. Southeast winds 10 knots within Kuskokwim Bay with waves 2 to 3 feet there. Offshore east to southeast flow out of Norton Sound in the lower lower Yukon Delta with waves there running a couple of feet. And on Thursday, south winds as high as 25 knots in the vicinity of St. Matthew with 8-9 foot waves. South winds 10 knots into Bristol Bay, 20 knots into Kuskokwim Bay, and then offshore flow as strong as 20 to 25 knots, especially through Etolan Strait with waves as high as 4 to 5 feet there just offshore of the lower Yukon Delta. And across the Chukchi Sea, winds will be southeast to south 5 to 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet, turning more westerly at Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay with waves there 2 to as high as 4 feet in the vicinity where there is some open water near Utqiagvik. And then on Thursday, look for southeast winds south of the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island, 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet. Generally easterly winds at 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea with waves right around a few feet. And then as we go up along the Arctic coast, winds become more westerly, 10 to 15 knots, with waves of 2 to 3 feet, especially where there is open water from Utqiagvik eastward through Kaktovik.